Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Victory Degree podcast. So excited for today's episode. We have a very special guest here with us today, Jovan Buha. Jovan, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm stoked about this. And for those who might not know who you are, I compiled a little mini resume. So let me read off some quick facts about some of your journey. So graduated from USC in 2014. You were a print and digital journalism major, sports media studies minor, intern for USCFootball.com. You were a radio host for KXSCLA for about a year and a half. You got into ESPN in 2011 as a staff writer. You were an editorial assistant and helped produce the Jalen Rose show, which I thought was really cool. Your your first main gig as a writer was covering the LA Clippers. You're an associate editor for live content 2016. You're an associate editor for NBA content 2018. And then you made your way to The Athletic, which is where you're at now. So Clippers beat reporter 2018 to 2020. Lakers beat reporter from December 2020 till now. And then some interesting things that I found out. You met Dan Bilzerian, which I have to hear that story. You met Migos. You've been you've been a guest on podcasts like Bill Simmons, Chris Broussard. The list goes on. And you also tried out for the G League. So out of all of those things I just listed out, what kind of sticks out to you? And what is, I guess, the most unbelievable if you were to tell Jovan from 10 years ago, like, hey, you went and did this?
That's a good question. I would say being a guest on the Bill Simmons podcast, even though I was a Grantland intern and did that pretty early in my college, I don't know if I'd say college career or tenure or whatever, but in my college experience, that was one of the reasons I got into sports media was his podcast and his columns on ESPN's Page 2 and just really enjoying that. So to be on it over a decade later into my career and over a decade after being an intern at the beginning of Grantland was a surreal experience. So that's one of them that was like definitely a bucket list moment for me. But honestly, my career has been a bucket list moment for me of like just being able to stay in LA where I was born and raised, being able to cover both LA basketball teams, really getting my foot in the door my sophomore year of college and not stepping out and really just, stepping my second foot in and staying in the room. Like that to me has been the biggest thing that has just been such a blessing. And, I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people in sport, at least for myself, I'm not in sports media, but I guess people aspiring to be in sports media, Bill Simmons is kind of like the pinnacle of sports media. I think a lot of us grew up listening to. I still listen to the pod. I try to listen to every single one. His NBA stuff with Ryan Russillo is amazing. His NFL stuff with cousin Sal is always top notch. So, I guess for you personally, what was your relationship with sports growing up? Like, was it always going to be this, like what you're doing now covering the NBA, or was there like a certain moment in time where you were like, maybe I'll give this sports media thing a try?
It was not a certainty by any means growing up. What I will say is I fell in love with basketball when I was about 8 years old. I started playing it in third grade. And, I growing up kind of typical kid, like you play with action figures and you like superheroes and cartoons and stuff. But I hadn't really found that thing that was really my thing and that I loved. And the second I started playing basketball, I just fell in love with it. And from that point on, played all the way through high school, and varsity and all that stuff. But I kind of knew like I'm pretty tall. I'm 6'5", but I knew I wasn't going to go to the NBA, and I knew I wasn't going to play like high level D1. So for me, it was through high school as I started to get more serious about my future and start trying to plan and map things out. I was like, at first I was like, maybe I'll be a coach or maybe I'll be a front office executive. But then I started to realize like how difficult those paths were. And I'd always been good at writing and always been getting like A's, A minuses in my writing classes. But in school, a lot of that stuff is pretty boring. It's like book reports or just kind of academic stuff. And I had a buddy who was writing for the school paper, and he was like, why don't you, we were just kind of talking through college applications and different things. He's like, why don't you join the school paper, see if you like it, see if you want to do journalism. And so I did that my senior year and just fell in love with it. And that rush of submitting something, having it be shown publicly, seeing your name in the newspaper, like your byline, like all that stuff was just really exciting for me. And from that point on, it was like, okay, like this is what I want to do. I want to write about basketball. And looking back, I actually, there were some signs earlier that I probably wasn't aware of, because going to my parents' house a couple summers ago, I was going through going through my room and going through some of my old stuff. And I found these notebooks that I had from like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. And I was doing like NBA rotations and, game plans and just, writing about different stuff. And it was like, I was already doing that stuff kind of naturally, just getting into basketball. So, and I had completely forgotten about all that, but to see that and then to see what I'm doing now, it all kind of makes sense that it was sort of when I fell in love with the game, this was almost predetermined.
What were your, I have to ask, because you brought up high school varsity basketball. What were the stats and what position did you play?
So stats not good. So I don't recommend looking those up. But I played center, so that was the thing. I mean, you're 6'5" in high school, like you're a center more often than not. And I would say for a center, I was undersized. Although maybe 6'5" is probably like an average center size for high school, depending on the league. But there were several times where we'd play someone 6'8", 6'9", near 7 feet, and would obviously be at a disadvantage there. But for me, I was, so maybe you'll relate to this, but I think the Serbian side kind of comes out when I play basketball, where it's a lot of hard fouls. And like I was almost the enforcer. And it's funny because back then I was like 6'5", $170. So I was really skinny. But get me on the basketball court and I just have this like mentality and this temper where I'm like decking guys and getting into altercations. And like I was ejected from multiple games. I would get technical fouls. And it was just like this alter ego on the basketball floor.
Yeah, it has to be a Serbian thing, because you probably saw Jokic's quote the other night when he got ejected. He was like, if we were in Serbia, who knows what would have happened to those refs? And I was like, that is such a Serbian thing to say. Like,
yeah,
that is, it's funny.
So that was my, like, I was more of a defensive guy. Of like, I had multiple games with like 3, 4, 5 blocks, but also plenty of games I fouled out and got ejected from just, I was, there was no easy layups around me.
Defensive anchor, high IQ player, high motor.
We'll go with that.
Always makes the right play. I like it. You actually had a vision board that you made when you were younger. And on that vision board, you put ESPN, and that was your dream job and your dream destination. You got to ESPN, did that for a little bit. What was that experience like? And the reason I asked partly is because I recently heard Ryan Russillo talk about this. So obviously his stint with ESPN, he said it was a lot cooler to tell people that you worked for ESPN versus actually working for ESPN. So I'm curious to hear what your experience was like at ESPN.
I would agree with that to an extent. And for me, probably more so just because of what I was doing. I wasn't, I had a weird relationship with the company, because I almost did more of the work I wanted to do when I wasn't working there, in a full-time capacity in the role that I was in. So I started, so yes, I had this vision board, and I've always kind of been big on having plans and mapping things out and really having like a North Star goal that you're shooting for. So for me, that was, growing up as a kid in the 90s and 2000s, like ESPN was the thing. And for me, once I decided that I wanted to pursue sports journalism, it was like, ESPN is the goal. That's what I want to do one day. So sophomore year, I start freelance writing for ESPN LA. They had just launched the city site back in 2009. And so I would do the type of thing where I would go to, like, the beat reporter has a conflict or just doesn't want to go to like a Saturday morning practice. They send me, I go to practice, I write a newser off of that, and I get paid like $50. And sometimes I'd cover a game if someone couldn't make it, and I'd get like $100. And started doing that pretty consistently throughout sophomore through senior year of college. Then after college, go to Fox Sports for a couple years, then end up back at ESPN. But this time I'm an editor, and I'm doing none of the stuff that I was doing before. And it was just kind of weird to me of like, I would still be going to games and events, but I would be way more behind the scenes and couldn't write or report on anything. And it was a little frustrating at times, but it was a really good experience. And to Russillo's point, like, having those 4 letters attached to your name, it opened up so many doors for me. And there's so many connections and relationships that I have now, both from people at ESPN and people I met through ESPN, that it was 100% worth it. It was like, loved going into the LA Live office and, going to watch NBA Today on my breaks, and just seeing, Stephen A come in the office and different celebrities. And like, it was just a really cool experience, really unlike anything else I've done work-wise. But in terms of what I was actually doing, I wasn't following, the reason why I got into this industry. And it wasn't to be an editor. It wasn't to be behind the scenes. It was to be in front of the camera and to have my name out there and be writing and reporting things. So ultimately, I got to a point in 2018 where I was like, I have to bet on myself. I have to, I have to at least take the chance of like, I want to be a reporter. And if I try and I fail, I can always go back and try and be an editor again. And hopefully there'll be a spot for me. But if I make it, then like I will have succeeded in what I wanted to do. And around 2018, I was 25. And that to me was kind of like, it was almost that age where I was hitting that make or break point of like, I don't want to be 30 and still be an editor and not have tried. So, but again, I went to Bristol a couple times. That was an awesome experience, seeing the campus there. It's literally like the size of a college campus and so many buildings, really cool experience. So I have nothing but good things to say about my time at ESPN, but I would say it definitely was one of those things where like it sounded way cooler than it was in with regard to like my actual position and my day-to-day duties.
So you're a beat reporter now for the Lakers, and you've been around a lot of different beat reporters, I'm assuming, throughout the years, and you've seen what works and you've seen what doesn't. What are some of the things that you've picked up on, maybe in your early years, maybe as you were getting, accustomed to the industry, some things that you picked up on that you're like, okay, this is what some of the really good reporters do. Okay, well, maybe I should stay away from this. This is maybe something I shouldn't do. Like, what were some of those things?
It's way more art than science. And that's something that I've had to learn, where everybody has their own blueprint for what works. And who are they talking to? Are they talking more to players? Are they talking more to coaches, more to the front office, agents, scouts? Like there's so many layers within the NBA sourcing and information world that you can go about it so many different ways. But I think one thing is, being comfortable being uncomfortable. And if you write something critical of a coach or a player, you show up the next day and you face the music. And if they want to cuss you out or confront you or just discuss what was written or said in depth, you have to show up. I think the art of sidling, which is basically after a player or coach does a press conference, walking up to them and walking out with them and having a side conversation, trying to get an exclusive tidbit. That's a big thing as well. And really just the art of showing up, because I think in general, and that comes with the beat writing, basically in the job description, but just, I think the day in, day out nature of it is you just pick up on so many different intricacies within a team, within a locker room, that you don't get if you just show up for the home games or occasionally at a practice or something. Like being there on a daily basis, traveling on the road. The road is the best access by far. The players get to know you. They recognize you. That's where you get some of your best information, best stories, is by traveling on the road. You bond with your colleagues as well. Like I'm going to dinner tonight with some of the other beat writers, and then you just also get to travel a lot. And like there's pros and cons to it. Like I get to go all around the U.S. And see cities I probably wouldn't like. I'm in San Antonio. I probably would never come here otherwise. But I'm getting the San Antonio experience. So I think it's a combination of really just always being in communication with as many people as possible from a team. Always kind of showing up, having your eyes and ears ready to report and absorb things. And also, I think finding the right balance of being critical and knowing when to maybe hold certain things, because if you are criticizing the team on a daily basis and you're around them on a daily basis, at some point that's going to lead to you kind of getting cut off or people not wanting to deal with you. So it's kind of finding the right balance of just being fair and honest and accurate, but maybe not crossing a certain line that a national reporter could cross or a columnist could cross in terms of their criticism.
So let's stay on that topic a little bit, because I think it's fascinating. I had Trey Edwards on, and he used to work for The Athletic, and so I asked him, because he would ask questions post game to the players and stuff, and he was telling me how he got really close with Book. And so there was one game where Book took this game-winning shot, he missed. It was kind of a bad shot. So then Trey afterwards, after the game, was like, "Hey, Book, he was basically criticizing him. It wasn't live. He didn't post any of it, any of the quotes, but he was like, "Hey, man, do you think you could have maybe, gotten a better shot? Like, was that the right play?" So I'm curious, like, what's your mentality coming in? You talked about finding that balance between criticism and maybe asking questions, some tough questions to the players. Like, what's your mentality going into it? And what are some of the questions that you think about? Because I'm always interested in, like as fans, we like to complain. And if LeBron is being lazy on defense, I'll be like, there's LeBron, he's not running back. But maybe post game, you won't go up to LeBron and be like, "Hey, man, do you think you could have tried harder on defense?" Like, I don't think that's probably the question you want to be asking. So curious to hear kind of what's your mentality going into some of the questions that you ask.
Well, I think it's a player by player basis, and that's another thing that you learn as a beat writer is certain guys can handle a little bit. Like Anthony Davis is one of those guys where sometimes you don't even have to bring it up. He'll bring it up himself of like, "I played like shit today." And that was one of the first things when I started covering the Lakers was they had this game early in the season. They were playing the Spurs. I forgot if they won or lost the game, but it was a pretty bad defensive game from them. And AD called himself out and was like, "We played like shit defensively tonight. That's on me. I'm our defensive captain and I have to be better." And there are certain players who will not take accountability. And if you ask them the wrong question, they'll get offended and they won't like you. And of course, like sometimes you just have to ask certain questions. So like, I feel like I can keep adding stipulations to sort of like the general rules of this. But for me, like I think I try to focus a little bit more on the game itself and what's happening on the floor. And again, there will be times where maybe there is something to bring up off the floor that is relevant, that if someone else hasn't asked, I will bring it up. But the way it also works too is kind of interesting, because there is sort of a pecking order in terms of like with the Lakers, Spectrum Sportsnet always gets the first couple of questions. And then depending on who raises their hand first or like where you're sitting in the room, sometimes I'll be like the third question at the press conference. Sometimes I'll be like sixth or seventh. So that also plays a part in the way I ask questions or think about them, because usually if you're going seventh, your first couple questions are probably gone already. So at that point, you kind of have to pivot. And there are times where I'm like, okay, I had like 4 questions I wanted to ask. All 4 got asked. And now I'm like pulling something, out of my ass where I'm like, I'm going to just throw something up there. But the worst thing is like having question FOMO or regret, where like you think of a better question like after the press conference. But I think for me, it's trying to be fair, but and also trying to find the balance of, like the Lakers were recently playing, they've been playing pretty well recently. And I asked Arvin Ham, I didn't want to come up with a negative question, but I was just curious, like, when you guys are going through this stretch where you're playing so well, like, how do you still find things to improve on? Like, how do you find things to work on? And like, that's kind of a way of, asking a question that is kind of touching on something a little bit more critical of like, what's been going wrong lately, but you're not asking it in that like blunt way of like, what haven't you liked recently? Like, I think there's kind of just an art to making it a little bit more of a softer or delicate question when appropriate. And then there are times where if last night it was, they blew an 18-point lead, almost lost the game. And that was the time for harder questions. So I think, again, it's kind of a case-by-case basis. And it's still something I'm learning and still something that I observe other reporters. There's certain questions they ask that I like, and I'll kind of file that away for future use. But for me, it's a constantly evolving process of just trying to learn how to ask better questions, be comfortable and confident asking those questions as well. Because sometimes, depending on the situation, there will be times I'm not feeling as confident in asking certain things. So like, just always kind of being grounded in that and knowing that at the end of the day, it's my job. And if I have to ask a tough question, it's just part of it.
Yeah, I imagine you're sitting there with no more questions to ask, and you're like, so what'd you think of the fans tonight? Like, the atmosphere in the stadium, pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, I'll try and like have like a future question kind of banked of like, this player has been shooting the ball well or whatever, and like use that as something kind of a softball if I'm really out of questions. But I do try to have like a few in the chamber in case the first couple get taken.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you, Jovan, I'm a big Kings fan. And so, maybe a question you could ask next time the Lakers play the Kings is like, hey, you're going up against De'Aaron Fox, playing at an MVP level. How do you slow him down? Maybe just file that one away for future.
Okay.
Right. You don't have to shout me out. That's just like a freebie you can have. Yeah. But what would you describe as like the responsibilities of your job? Like if somebody were to ask you, like, what's the goal with your reporting? Like, what's the overarching, this is the type of reporter that I want to be. This is the message that I want to send. This is the type of content I want to produce. Like, just overarching, like, what is that to you?
That's a really good question. And I think it's one that I'm still figuring out in a way. What I will say is one of my biggest goals is always being honest, and I keep using the word fair. But to me, it's like, I want to tell you what's really happening. And there's a limitation to how much I can share, again, based on, sourcing and just information I have to sit on, but also, protecting certain people and just, again, not, if a player plays poorly, I can't just come out and say, well, this player played like shit tonight. Like, I could, but I'm potentially risking the relationship, not only with that player, but also other players in that locker room who see me saying a certain thing about their teammate, and that might rub them the wrong way. So there is a political element to it for sure. But within that, I try to be as honest as possible. And I do say, I think a kind of more controversial example, or not, I don't know if controversial, but like polarizing example is probably like D'Angelo Russell in the Western Conference Finals. I thought he played pretty poorly, ended up getting benched or moving to the bench, and I in my opinion was the most critical of all the beat writers covering the team of him, and I felt that I was being the most accurate and was not kind of playing the political game. And it was just sort of like, these are high stakes situations. He's not playing well, and I'm going to be critical and honest about it. So for me, I think first and foremost is always honesty and trying to share my thoughts, the thoughts of the players, the thoughts of the team, and the thoughts of the fan base too, and acknowledging that. And then second, I would say is smart coverage. Like for me, I'll do film breakdowns. I try to watch film and research statistics and learn new statistics. There's always new stuff coming out every season, and for me, it's trying to meld those two together. Where on the one hand, I'm bringing you insights and reporting and different nuggets about the team and the players, and then on the other hand, I'm also breaking stuff down in a way that I try to make it accessible as well, where sometimes you read certain writers or listen to them on podcasts and they're talking about these high level concepts, and it's not really accessible. So I would say, honesty, accessibility, and intelligence, like those are kind of the three things I'm trying to bring to my coverage. And I don't always bring all three, but that's really the goal, I would say. It's just making people smarter, helping them learn something, but also making it where it's digestible and it's not feeling like I'm isolating them or making them feel dumb by, you don't know what a Spain pick and roll is or whatever. Like it's just I want you to enjoy what you're reading and learn something.
You do a lot of content on the side as well, on Instagram and on TikTok. I definitely want to get into some of that. But you talked a lot about kind of the professional relationships that you try and maintain with players. Is there ever a personal side to it? Like I saw on your Instagram, you have a young son, and you took him to, I think you met Austin Reeves one game. Like, do you ever hit up any of the players like, hey, like, what are you doing for dinner tonight? Or is there any sort of personal relationship to that? Or is it just strictly professional?
It's strictly professional. And I think, again, everyone has their own way they go about things. Like I wouldn't be opposed to getting dinner or whatnot with a player if, that opportunity presented itself. But for me, I think at the end of the day, there is always a line there in terms of like we can be friendly and we could even become friends, but I am a reporter and you are a player. And if you're not playing well or shooting the ball well, like I have to talk about that and I have to write that. And if you're potentially on the trading block and going to be moved at the deadline, like I have to talk about that. And if you're not playing well and I think someone else should be starting over you or playing more than you, then like I'm going to talk about that. So like there just is this there's kind of just this line there of or they get arrested or like what, like you can kind of play so many different scenarios, but like there's always going to be some form of news or something with the player that I'm going to have to be talking about. And there are people who compromise that and prioritize their relationships with players, and they are buddy and some of those people, it helps them in their career and it helps them advance. But for me, I'm not willing to do that. Again, with the honesty part, like I want to give you honest content and coverage. And so I'm always going to prioritize that. And if that comes at the expense of maybe not being as close to someone or buddy, then, so be it. But there certainly are guys that I have better relationships with, certainly, I'd say Austin Reeves is one of them. But I also try, when he wasn't playing as well earlier in the season, like I was critical of him, and he's been playing better recently. So I've also been acknowledging that. But like, for me, I'm not wired to, I'm not a shill. I'm not a homer. There are people, again, who do that type of content and it works for them. It's just, that's not how I'm wired. So for me, I'm always going to try and be as honest and accurate as possible. And I would rather do that than be, friends with someone. So, and because at the end of the day, like there's going to be something also that upsets a player inevitably too. Like, so that's kind of the other side of this is not only do I have to like report or write about some of this stuff, but like players are sensitive and they will see a piece of, a lot of stuff gets taken out of context, especially with me. Like I'll have random aggregation reports where I'll be making a point or talking about something. Someone will take one sentence in like the middle of the paragraph, just say, Jovan said this on Twitter. And then I've had players respond to those types of reports and get mad at me. And it's like, you didn't see the full context of what I was saying. And that's just kind of how social media works, how NBA players react to stuff. And for me, I know at some point, if we're friends, there's going to be a point where they probably get mad at me about something. And for me, it's better to kind of have that border.
That's an interesting take. It's almost, it's essentially conflict of interest, right? So I think that's interesting and something I didn't really think about before, because I always assumed, hey, the reporters, maybe, they're buddy with certain players and they naturally get closer if they're covering someone more. But you are right. And, kind of whether we like it or not, the sports media world dictates a lot of our opinions, right? It dictates even a player's trade value. Like, if there's just positive news about a player all the time, I think the sentiment around the league grows that, hey, this player might be more valuable than they actually are. Or they're playing better than they actually are. You brought up D'Lo in the Western Conference Finals. I think that's a really good example. Do you have like your favorite moment? This is kind of a cliche question, but favorite moment, covering the Lakers, or was there a question, or did LeBron ever say like, hey, that was a really good question, or anything like that?
Favorite moment covering the Lakers would be, I'll throw it back. I'll throw it back to 2016, Kobe's final game. I think that was, and it's funny because one, I was at Fox Sports back then. Two, I had horrible seats because that was like, it was like a playoff level media attendance for that game. So I was all the way up in not even the nosebleeds, above the nosebleeds, because the press box is like above the 300 section at crypto.com arena. So I had like the worst, and even normally when I was going to games back then, like I had better seats than that. So it was like, this is the worst seats I've maybe ever had at Staples Center. And I didn't care because it was just, the atmosphere was like, Kobe's a god in LA and he's a god to Laker fans. And that final game and the 60 points and just like seeing the reaction, it was almost more exciting, like seeing the reaction from the crowd and seeing the celebrities and just all that stuff kind of combined was like an atmosphere that I've never experienced at Staples Center. I wasn't there for 2009 and 2010, and 2020 obviously was in the bubble. So I would say that. Otherwise, this last playoff run was really exciting, and it just kind of came out of nowhere where they weren't very good for most of the season. They make the trades at the trade deadline, and then all of a sudden they have this crazy turnaround, make the Western Conference Finals. That was the deepest I'd gone covering a team that was my primary team. I covered the Suns in the 2021 Finals. So that was another one too of just, I was the only finals I've covered was 2021. Being in Milwaukee for that championship, that was a really cool moment. And then honestly, this in-season tournament I think was really cool, and being there for the inaugural championship, Lakers winning it, being around them winning it. So those are some of the moments that stick out. And then of course, I'll give you an answer. I'll give you a definitive answer. It was LeBron breaking Kareem's record. One, I will say LeBron was probably my favorite player growing up, favorite or second favorite. Him and Shaq are my two favorite of all time. So just being there, like I got his shoes in fifth grade, when he was a rookie, and just kind of seeing his whole career, basically from early in my basketball journey through now, like that's just been an incredible experience now getting to cover him on a daily basis. But two, they brought us onto the floor, the beat reporters and a couple of other media people immediately, because remember, they stopped the game. So he makes the bucket. They basically call like a referee's timeout, stop the game. He's going crazy. People, now his family's coming on the court, his friends, and then they bring us on the court and we get to record it all and just be there and soak it up. And like, I've been on the floor before, but I've even been on the floor like as a game is about to kind of start, but like being on the floor, seeing the 20,000 people in the arena, everyone's looking on the court, everyone's looking at LeBron. Like it was just a totally different experience that like, I don't know if I'll ever be in that situation again where they bring us on the court like that. So like, that was just a historic moment that I think when I look back on my career 30, 40 years from now, that's going to be one of the things that stands out first.
What was that feeling like being on the court? And I ask because like I've gone on tours of stadiums, and sometimes you go down to the field and you just look up into the stands and you imagine, how many 1,000 people looking at you, and just everything feels so grand and you feel like the center of attention. And even with no fans there, it's still an amazing experience. I can only imagine, like you were describing, standing on the court, with 20,000 fans, like you said, all looking at LeBron. Like what were some of the emotions that you were going through? Like what was running through your head?
It was overwhelming. Like it was exhilarating. Like you just felt this rush of energy and adrenaline. And again, like, and I kind of knew, of course, on some level, like everyone's looking at LeBron, no one's looking at me.
They're like, oh, that's
But
Jovan. Like,
yeah. But it was still like, I'm a part of this history. Like, this is, there's going to be, people are photographing, recording this right now. Like, I'm going to be a part of, but to be like in the background of someone's photo, forever, kind of randomly. And like, it just was one of those things where it was a really cool moment. And, I will say, and like transitioning from covering the Clippers to the Lakers, like it's been an interesting process for me of I had so much history with the Clippers, and that had been the team I was so familiar with. But of course, growing up in LA, with Kobe and with Shaq, I just said Shaq was probably my favorite player of all time. Like, it was hard not to be a Laker fan, growing up. So I think, being able to cover the team that I was a childhood fan of, no longer a fan. I had to kill my fandom a long time ago. And that's another one of my reporter rules. Like, you can't be a fan. You just can't. You could be a fan of players or maybe storylines, but like, I don't think you could be a fan of a team. So kind of doing that, like, and transitioning to that, and then being there for so many moments of, Kobe's final game, his jersey retirement, LeBron breaking the record. Like, it's been really cool to see some of those moments. And, before I was watching them on TV, and now I'm there in person reporting on them.
So you beat me to it, but I was actually going to ask about the fandom, because that's something I always think about when I look at reporters. It's like, if, I'm a Kings fan, so, my dream might be, hey, I want to cover the Kings, or I'm a Niners fan, right? Like, oh, covering the Niners would be amazing. But then I sometimes ask myself, like, would I be as excited if I was covering, I don't know, the Washington Commanders or something, right? Like a team I have no connection with. So your rule is that you can't be a fan, but be honest with me. Would you be as excited to do the job that you currently do if you were a beat reporter for, let's say, OKC or San Antonio or another team like that?
No, I mean, I would say no. So, I think there's an element, like there's a lot of factors that go into it. Like, I think just in terms of, I don't think this is a controversial opinion. Maybe it is, but I think if you were like ranking the NBA beats in terms of just what would be appealing to someone, the Lakers would be at the top of the list, if not, top three at a minimum. I think just in terms of living in LA, getting to cover the, one of the most iconic, if not the most iconic franchise of basketball, covering LeBron. Like, there are just so many things that go into it that, and kind of knowing that, LeBron will retire at some point, we think. I'm not sure, but, and they'll probably go out and get another star. So like, and then they'll pair that guy with Anthony Davis. And I don't know if they'll win a championship during that stretch, but like, just kind of their history, like they always are relevant, even when they're bad, which you kind of want as a beat writer, because you don't really want to be covering a team that's not relevant. So for me, I definitely view it as like arguably the best beat job in the NBA, and arguably the best beat job really in, American professional sports. So it's an honor to be able to do that. But, and I'm sure on some level, subconsciously, like there's a part of the fandom that never died, and like that still is holding on to something that makes it more exciting to be covering it. But I think there's a lot of other elements of just staying in LA, still being around my family. And I think covering, like, what I will say too is, like, between covering the Lakers and the Clippers, like the Lakers are definitely a more media friendly organization. They welcome the attention and the coverage and all that stuff that comes with it. So like, from a job perspective, it's also been an easier process in terms of just dealing with the team, dealing with the players, and covering the team. And those are all factors that are really important for the job. So I would say, like, no, if I was in insert random small market city, like I probably wouldn't be as excited as I am now. But I think it has to do more with like all the factors rather than just me growing up liking the Lakers.
Yeah, I hate the Lakers. growing up as a Kings fan.
I get it.
Listen, it sucks, and I don't want to get into the whole like small market versus big market debate. We can probably talk about that for hours. I have talked about it hours on end with my friends. One of my good friends who lives out in LA is a Lakers fan. We've had the small market versus big market debate and how it's unfair and all that good stuff. So I'm not going to get into it, but I will say it's annoying. It's annoying being a fan of the Kings and having to deal with the Lakers and the media. And anytime we beat the Lakers, the next day on First Take, it's not, hey, are the Kings good? It's what's wrong with the Lakers. And I'm listen, I'm gonna support my boy Fox, and I mentioned him earlier, but I think if he was in a bigger market, I think the MVP chatter would be louder than it currently is. But hey, it's kind of how the world works, and that's all we can do. Gonna support my Kings till the end, man. I survived that 16-year playoff drought, so I made it this far. I'm gonna I'm gonna keep supporting them, and hopefully we make some noise this year. I don't know. I think we would have beaten the Warriors last year if Fox didn't hurt his finger, but I guess that's a debate for another day. Trying out for the G League. I have to ask about this because this must have been a crazy experience for a 6'5" undersized defensive anchor. Uh, what was trying out for the G League like?
Yeah. So the crazy part of that too that it isn't as well known, although I think I mentioned it in the piece, but it didn't get it wasn't as sexy. The context wasn't as sexy as just the headline of trying out for the G League, but I had actually broken my leg like 5-6 months before that. So I hadn't played basketball, and I broke it playing basketball. But I hadn't played basketball since then. So this was actually my first time playing basketball since breaking my leg, and I'm returning. And it just kind of, it was actually, someone I knew from the Clippers working on their PR staff, and they were like, hey, they actually pitched me on the idea, and they're like, hey, it was like right when I joined the Athletic, and they're like, if we have a story idea for you, would you like to try out for the G League team? We will comp your, because one of the ways they kind of filter it is you have to pay, I think it's some like $250, $300 to try out. So it's not just like 10,000 people show up just kind of not taking it seriously. It's like, if you're going to try out for this, you have to sign all this paperwork, and I think they do like a background check, and then you have to pay a tryout fee. So they're like, we'll waive your tryout fee, like you're good with all the paperwork, all that stuff, just show up and play and write about it, and we would appreciate that. So I was like, yeah, like I talked to the Athletic, and then it ended up like a couple other of my colleagues did similar things later in the off season. But it was the thing that stood out to me the most in terms of, like, again, I played varsity, we made CIF playoffs, like it was probably lower tier, wasn't like one of these powerhouses, but we were playing, I would say medium to lower high level teams, and the speed was just the thing. And the thing was, like, this was kind of the tryout to get to like the next tryout. And then in the next tryout was like when the guys actually, made the team or were invited to, play for the team. And just like the speed of some of these guys was like, it was just, up and down at like such an insane speed that, like I was gassed pretty much immediately. And my game has changed throughout the years, where now I've become more of like a spot up shooter. So in high school, I had like a low post game where I'd hit you with like a little drop step or like a little hook shot. But I kind of learned like I'd rather save the physicality and the banging for the defensive side. So I become more of like a 3-point shooter now. But being 6'5", this was like a lot of NBA size guys. So I was actually playing like the 2/3 on my team, because at first it was like go through drills, like do layups and shooting stuff, and then it was like running up and down the court and defensive slides, and then it became actual scrimmaging. And in the scrimmaging, I'm like matched up against guys like that are just fast as shit, and I'm like, I can't hang. Like, so it was a really cool experience. Like, actually, just tore my Achilles about 2 months ago. So my basketball days might be over. We'll see. Hoping to make a full recovery, but I don't know if I want to risk further injury down the road. But I will say like that is one of the highlights of my basketball career, is just being able to say like I tried out for the G League. I was told I didn't suck and that I wasn't one of the worst people there. So that was
there you go.
That was nice to hear. That I was, even some people say I held my own, so I'll take that. But my goal is just like, don't get dunked on, don't get embarrassed. Like one of the things to this day, I've never been dunked on, and that's because most of the time I'd take someone's legs out. But I've never been dunked on. I refuse to be dunked on, and that didn't happen. So for me, it was a win.
Dude, you're a natural Serbian, man. You got the aggression and the 3-point shooting. Like that's the recipe for success right there. You're like I was thinking about like who your player comp would be. Maybe like a Steve Novak, perhaps. A little corner three action, maybe.
I would say I'm more of like a Dario Saric.
Oh, okay.
That's who I would say, because I can pass. I'm a good passer.
Okay.
I mean, I got the stereotypical like Serbian package where it's like, fundamentally sound.
Right.
I like passing more than scoring, honestly. But if you leave me open, I can shoot. So like, I would say that's probably more of a. I'd say Saric is kind of where I'm at right now.
Big team player, huge glue guy. You're a glue guy. You just keep the offense. You keep the offense running, man. I love it. All right, a couple more questions to finish us out here. I know you have to run, so we'll try to keep these quick. But I have to ask you, you're in the sports media world. You see a lot of what's going on. You're doing your own content on the side, which we talked about a little bit before. For those unaware, we'll put all your links in the description. But Jovan has some really cool content on both TikTok and Instagram, behind the scenes stuff. Some of his, he'll do like if he's on the road, kind of, behind the scenes of traveling with an NBA team, all that cool stuff. So if you're into that type of content, highly suggest you go check him out. But now the sports, just in general with sports media, it seems like everything is shifting, and it seems like every player has his own podcast. And before, it was we relied on reporters like yourself to kind of get the inside scoop. Now we have players who are going on podcasts telling it from their own perspective of, hey, here's exactly how I felt. So I guess maybe just really quickly, what's your take on the whole athlete podcast world and just like sports media in general? Like, where do you see all of this going?
So I'm all for people, finding their voice and wanting to share their story and their narrative. So I think it's been cool. And I think there's been some we've seen some success stories with it in terms of, you had like Richard Jefferson and Channing Frye with the Road Tripping podcast, JJ Redick and his podcast, Draymond Green. I think Paul George's podcast is pretty good. And then, of course, there's been some of the guys kind of post-career, Gilbert Arenas, Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Richard Jefferson again. But I think for me, my one issue with it is that I think sometimes like there are certain things that are said in a way that is clearly just like not true or like not how something happened. And get like it almost, sometimes people take it as like, well, if the player said it on their own podcast, then like this must be how it was, or this like it almost is like a replacement for them having accountability or being forced to answer certain questions. So I'm not going to call any players out or say any podcasts, but like there are certain podcasts where I'll see the clips and I'm like, this isn't how this went, or this is like this player kind of taking the easy way out and sort of like presenting the narrative in the way that they want it presented. So that's my one like caveat with it, of just like, I don't think it replaces an actual like sit down interview with a real reporter asking real questions that, and kind of holding their feet to the fire when appropriate. So I don't think it's a replacement for that. But if people want to create content, like I'm doing a lot of the same stuff, so I'd be a hypocrite to say like don't do it. I just think like sometimes players don't have the best self-awareness, And I think the ones that are successful in the space and the best quality ones are the ones where they do have the self-awareness, they will be self-critical, and they're kind of bringing you behind the scenes of just their experience with things, or sharing stories. And like, that's always the best. I think the best part of it by far is when they share stories about teammates and what's it like in the locker room, what's it like on the team plane, like what was this interaction like with this guy. Like, that's the best stuff. But sometimes when it gets to like them talking about themselves and like, you know, their thoughts on certain things, or their game or whatever, that's when I get a little bit like, okay, well, now this is basically glorified PR. And just because you're saying, you know, you have a co-host who's one of your friends, and you know, this network is putting it out, all of a sudden it's like, well, this is legitimate. And it's like, no, there's a nuance to it. So for me, like the stories and stuff I love, but when they start to get into like retelling of certain events, or like, you know, their recollection of things, like sometimes it gets to me a little too PR-y. If that's even a word.
Well, we just invented it, so it is.
We just invented
I
it,
think
yeah.
I think it's, I can't remember who said this, but with a lot of athlete podcasts, the clips are almost always better than the actual full length podcast. And so
that's true too. Yeah.
You know, to your point, I am more interested in the behind the scenes stuff. So if there's a clip out there of player blah 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 talking about his experience and blah blah blah, I'll click on that and I'll watch that because that's what I'm interested in. And I think also we're getting kind of close to oversaturation a little bit, because, you know, if there's too many players with too many podcasts, it's like, okay, well, which one do I listen to? I guess people will gravitate to whoever they like and all that stuff. And I guess the best people will rise to the top. But I think it's an interesting topic, because I think recently with podcasting, ever since about 2020, I think the whole market has really exploded. And like you said, I think it's awesome. And I think what, you know, people like JJ are doing is fantastic. I love his podcast, love his interviews, for many of the same reasons that you laid out. So I think all in all, I think it's great. And like you said, I'm doing a podcast. I would also be a hypocrite if I was like, you know, don't do it or it sucks or whatever. So I can't really speak much to that. But two quick questions, Jovan, before we get out of here. First question, something that I think about a lot. You're around some of the highest performing athletes in the world constantly, and you see a lot of their, you know, work ethic. You see what they do day in and day out. Does any of it ever rub off on you? Like when you see how hard LeBron works, or any of the other players on the team, are you ever like, you know what, like, dude, damn it, like I want to work just as hard as LeBron. Like I want to be the LeBron of, you know, sports media.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think seeing LeBron's longevity and his unprecedented success for me has been, you know, a motivating factor with my own career. I would say similar things with Kobe. Of, you know, people love the Mamba mentality, and you know, sort of like the Kobe going at his teammates in practice and saying you're soft as Charmin and this and that. But like, to me, the stuff that has always been fascinating with Kobe is when he would really like nerd out on the game of basketball and be like, you know, I studied like this player's footwork, or you know, I would watch film of this, or like, and really would kind of break things down and get into the minutia of it. And like, that's how I've always been, where for me, it's people in media of, I'm trying to steal, you know, this person's, the way they, you know, tell this story, or the, you know, their energy on their podcast, or the way they ask this question, or like whatever it is, or, you know, if it's writing related, you know, their lead, like why did they write this lead to this feature this way, or something like that. Like I'm always looking for things to take from other people, and learn from. And so for me, like definitely seeing that stuff up close has had an impact on me. And then as well, I would say now, like going through the rehab process and physical therapy, like I have a new appreciation for what athletes go through when they are injured. And for me, it's kind of like, I almost feel like an athlete right now, in the sense of like everything I'm doing is about like being healthy and ready for games. And it's like outside of games, I'm like resting, I'm like icing my leg, I'm like doing PT. So it's sort of like my days now kind of revolve around what can I do to like be in peak physical form for those few hours that I have to walk around, and it's like tough on my leg now. So I've kind of gone through that athlete experience of like you know, with them, it's LeBron. It's, the second he's done with the game, he's icing, and then he's drinking like cherry tart juice, and then he's gonna go have like a meal, and then he's gonna go sleep for like 10 hours, and just like stuff like that. It's all geared towards performance. And for me, of course, at a different level, and I'm not even playing a sport right now, but it is sort of the same kind of logic of like everything I'm doing is so I can be available for a game and be at peak mental performance, and also now with my leg, trying to be at peak physical performance, and be able to handle all that comes with a game night.
I think Trey Edwards told a story of how one time he went out to a club and LeBron was there. I think it was in Cleveland maybe, and LeBron was like icing his knees in the club. And he was
Yeah.
like, dude, this guy is just like on a different level. And it speaks to exactly what you just said, where it's like every living minute off the court is dedicated to recovery and to optimizing his body. I think that's fascinating. And I love that you're taking some of that stuff from him and from other players and applying it to your own life. I think honestly, we can learn a ton from athletes. Even, a lot of them come from, not the best situation, but they made it work, and it's through perseverance, hard work, dedication, a lot of the things that people like to talk about but hate doing. And it takes a lot of effort to do. And so, that's why I started this podcast, was to learn from people like yourself and from athletes. Well, you are an athlete. You're like an all-in-one. You're an athlete. You're a reporter.
There we go.
Jovan, so the way that we end every episode is I will read you a piece, speaking of advice and learning from others, I will read you a piece of advice that the guest before you left for you, not knowing who you were. And so our last guest was Ben Fox. So Ben is he's a freelance, sports contributor now. But he does a lot of the NFL betting stuff, is pretty much an expert in that world. And so his advice to you was take advantage of all your opportunities and know when to push the envelope. So two things, and we'll finish out. What does that mean to you? And what piece of advice would you like to leave for our next guest, who, as you might have guessed, you will not know who it is?
Yeah. Well, I think opportunities and taking advantage of opportunities are what has made my career. I've any opportunity I've had, I've tried to make the most out of it. I've tried to go above and beyond, in terms of just always doing more than was required. And I think that is part of what helped me stand out early in my career was, I was willing to sacrifice. I joined a fraternity in college, and I missed plenty of party nights. And, it was like my friends were out partying and I was out at Staples Center, or I was trying to get some sleep to go to practice the next morning. And like, there was just a bunch of sacrifices that I made. And that was to make the most out of the opportunities in front of me. And I knew how precious they were, and I didn't want to waste that. And then also, I think, knowing when to push the envelope, like there were times where I was pushy with some of the stuff that I was doing with, again, talking about ESPN, like I wasn't supposed to be at certain things, or I wasn't supposed to write about certain things because I was an editor and I was behind the scenes. And like, I got in trouble sometimes where I was like, no, like there was one time I was out of practice that some news happened. No one else from the company was there. And I ended up writing a newser on it, but then I got in trouble because it was like, well, why were you even there in the first place? Like, you weren't supposed to be there. And in my mind, I was like, I just wrote you guys a newser. I covered something that no one was going to cover, and you guys should be like thanking me for this. And instead, I'm getting like scolded. So I think it's always making the most of whatever opportunity you have, but then also knowing there are some times you got to break the rules, and that's okay. For me, I would say my piece of advice for the next person would be bet on yourself. You'll never regret it. And that's something I think I've lived by. I took a chance again, leaving my dream company that I had always wanted to work at. I had been working at since college in some capacity. And I just decided, if I don't try and become a beat reporter or an NBA reporter right now, it's probably never going to happen. And I will always regret that. And for me, for anyone listening to this, like, whatever it is you want to do, like bet on yourself and just go do it. And if it doesn't work out, you can always go back to doing what you were doing before or figure something else out. But I think that is a better scenario than never trying it and just never knowing and having that regret. So for me, that was something I never wanted to live with, was the regret of not trying. So definitely bet on yourself. And even if it doesn't work out, I don't think you're going to regret it.
Beautiful. What a way to end this pod. Jovan, it has been an absolute pleasure and a joy to talk to you today. This hour has flown by. You have other things you need to get to, so we'll let you go. All of your socials will be plugged in the description. So TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. You can find all of Jovan's work on The Athletic. Highly recommend, like we talked about at the beginning of this episode. Jovan consistently puts out great content, and it's always a joy to read, and love your take on a lot of things. So Jovan, it's been awesome. I'm wishing you the best of luck in your career and your future endeavors. I am not wishing the Lakers the best of luck because I hate the Lakers. Go Kings. And thanks again for coming on.
Thank you so much, man. This was a great interview.
Absolutely. Till next time.